Is this the debris from the buildings that have already been taken down? And what will be done with this?
Yes, Sandy, this is the main debris pile, and if you'll notice that there's quite a bit of rebar and cement in here. And what's occurring here is we're decontaminating a lot of this material and bringing it over to the main debris area, and the bankruptcy trustee is going through it, and some of the salvageable, recyclable material can be shipped off to other steel companies for reprocessing into new steel and things of that nature. Much of this material, as you see, the rebar and the attached cement that came from the floors in the various buildings, what's occurring here, that material will be salvaged over to, or actually deposited into the landfill when it is constructed. And we're just not going to leave it set out here. It's been washed down, hosed down in decon areas, decontamination areas, and none of that material that you're seeing in this main debris pile is contaminated with anything major.
So much of the buildings that once stood here are now in the debris pile and have already been cleaned, ready to...
Right. This was the one of the major areas, and contained many of the aging tanks. And this is where the viscose or the rayon was actually manufactured from the aging tanks into the spinning rooms. Of course, many of the people who worked here would have different names for the various processes, which I'm not familiar with. And of course, the debris pile that you saw, many of those transfer lines and the rebar and the cement were taken up from this particular area. What occurred here is when the EPA decided that many of these buildings cannot be rehabilitated or were so dangerous that our people could not walk into them to take out the various tanks and transfer lines and get rid of the contaminated material, we had to approach it from the factor of take the buildings down, go in and get the material, but make sure that our people who were reclaiming this material or taking the material down would be safe and the operation would be safe. Now, as you look over here at Churn and Mix number 2, that's a 6-story structure. And as we're talking here, just in a couple of days, that particular structure will be brought down. As you see in that particular area, the first 3 floors have been, the brick has been taken out from around it, and you see some large tanks on the second floor there. On the third floor right above it, what's occurring is that the contractor is cutting those beams, and we have drag lines attached to the heavy equipment over there, the backhoes, the ukes with dirt in them, and some of the major bulldozers. Those drag lines are attached to the 4th and 5th floors and those openings, and just as soon as the last beams are cut by the contractor, we hope to bring into a wall of water. We will see the spray of water over there into an impact zone and bring that particular unit down. That is a heavily contaminated area. What occurred, in that particular process, they took cellulose, added various chemicals, and it went through a chemical process, finally into the aging tanks, and that is where they actually forced the material into the various processes which made rayon or viscose or whatever was needed. And hopefully that facility will come down in the next several days. Off to the right of that facility, you see the major power plant. That power plant supplied the electricity and the power and the steam and the air and the pressure and everything else for the various facilities here on site during the facility. We do not plan on taking that particular power plant down.
Will it be ever used to augment the town's power supply?
As far as I know, you would have to ask a power engineer, but the facility is so aged, the renovation would have to be so great that we doubt very much of that. Looking at just as a layman, I would say that it would probably not be feasible as it stands right now. If you want to go in and rework the power units and the various furnaces, it could possibly be done, but you'd have to meet the current Clean Air Act, and he just may as well tear the facility down eventually and build a new power plant if that's what it would be necessary. But right now, as it stands, no, I don't. The insides of the power units and things of that nature are just not feasible using it.
There's not much here then that you foresee in the future ever being saved.
From what I have been told from talking to a number of the people who have been on site for years, who have worked here, old-time people who have been employed here, the land is extremely valuable. The buildings are just completely outdated. Down here, well, okay. You want to get down to acid reclaim?
All right.
That's down where the major was located, by the way, right in this area when we brought the stack down.
Okay, this
Right
is
in
the
this
area that
this
the stack.
This is the area where the stack was located, right here. That came down on November 11th of 1997. We had a demolition contractor bring that fume stack down. Everybody in whoever was employed here at Avtex knew that stack as the fume stack. And what it did, it had several large fans connected to the base of the stack, and it took the fumes for the various process lines and sent it in the stack and shot it up into the air. During the winter months, you could see what looked like steam coming out of it. During the summer months, naturally, the heat from the stack, from the fumes, equaled the outside temperature, so you couldn't see that steam.
And you mentioned that there are 17 miles of underground pipe systems?
Right, it's a sewer system that serviced the 75 plus acres of buildings that were involved here. And all of those sewer lines are interconnected, and they end up at the wastewater treatment facility, which has been upgraded. And that wastewater treatment facility is actually the barrier between the plant and the river here to make sure that no contamination goes into the nearby river. And the reason for that, the basic reason was the state of Virginia shut down the facility after some 2,000 violations of the Clean Water Act, or the violations of the State Water Act at that time. So you have almost 2,000 violations over a period of years during the latter part of the the actual operation of Avtex, and that is not acceptable neither to the state nor to the federal facilities, because you have people living along this river who actually gather the water into the various drinking drinking facilities, such as their water facilities, where they actually take the water from the river, put it into their large holding tanks, treat the water before it goes into people's homes.
What is feeding into these 17 miles? Is it rainwater?
Okay, right now all of them are cut off, with the exception of the excess going into the lagoons, which take some of the contamination out. No, we have cut off some of the sewer lines. Many of the other sewer lines are still active. They do take into those sewer lines the surface water, the rainwater, and process it before it's discharged into the nearby river. And of course, those lagoons that are nearby, which we'll take a look at in just a few moments, those lagoons, which are huge, and they have contamination in them, in many of them. And you'll see that, and that particular surface water, rainwater, is treated at the facility too. The 17 acres, 17 miles of sewer lines, approximately 17 miles of sewer lines, they have to be examined. One thing that the EPA is very serious about looking at is the soil contamination remaining at the site, the groundwater contamination, and of course the lagoons. We have to address those before EPA will eventually move from the site. And there are two programs, I've got to qualify this, there are two programs in EPA right at the present time. One is long-term remediation, which we've been here since 1989, I believe. And this particular removal action, which is underway for approximately 2 years, the on-scene coordinator, Mr. Mike Toll, and his group has overseen the various contractors in tearing down many of the buildings which are unsafe, and we can't get into to remove the contaminated materials, so you have to tear the buildings from outside. That's a 2-year project, and included in that project is the location and development of the on-site landfill. The on-site landfill, from what we have been advised now, will not contain any hazardous materials. None of the hazardous materials that we've reclaimed so far have been shipped off-site under the removal action. Under the remedial action prior to that, there's many hazardous materials that have been shipped off, but we're trying to locate various sites throughout the nation which can accept the hazardous materials, liquids, mercury, contaminated material, so we can ship that off-site properly. We demand that this particular site be taken care of, as we do all Superfund sites, relative to the contaminants. Now, I have one statement that I always use with just about every Superfund site I go to, and that is relative to the Avtex site. The people of Virginia, Warren County, and Front Royal can expect EPA in the state of Virginia to do nothing less to clean this up, make sure it's safe for industrial use as far as the people are concerned, because it's a long process. It took many, many years to develop this site. It's heavily contaminated. We're trying to do our best incrementally as funds become available to take care of this particular site. We're eventually going to turn this site over to whatever authority wants to redevelop it once it is suitable for industrial use. So that's basically the bottom line.
How long do you see this project eventually coming to a completion? How long from now?
When it's completed, can't give you an idea on that length. As far as the current removal activity is concerned, we anticipate the latter part of 1999, when all of this material that you've seen, the various waste piles going into the landfill, that will be in the latter part of 1999, and that's projected on schedule at the present time. As far as the long-term EPA remedial cleanup is concerned, we're taking a look at the remedial investigation of the various aspects of the groundwater, the soil contamination, and the lagoons at the present time. That will lead to a feasibility study on how do we get, if there is contamination in the groundwater, the soil, and the contamination in the lagoons, how do we get rid of that? How do we treat it? I've often said in many Superfund sites in Region 3, if somebody could give me a magic powder, or give us a magic powder and sprinkle it all over the ground or all over the buildings and take care of this material overnight, we'd buy off on that yesterday.
I know people have set warnings about eating the fish from the river for the next 100 years. This stuff just doesn't go away very quickly, does it?
It's part of the food chain, and we caution people of if you do have a fish advisory on this river, if you do, and I haven't been informed that you do have a fish advisory on this particular river. There are many hundreds of rivers in the United States where fish advisories are in force, where you have PCBs, the various you have a food chain there, and the best thing to do is just, if you like to fish, catch and release. If you like to get a big one, trophy it, but don't eat it. If you have a fish advisory in this is right.
Okay.
This was the basis for the big stack, the fume stack. And you notice the heavy construction of cement and the rebar in it, and that held that stack up. It was a huge stack, and that was taken down by EPA because it posed a threat and actually would be of no further use to the community or to the area at all. If we hadn't taken down, eventually, if the facility is brought up, purchased or by a development authority or whatever it might be, or used by a development authority, the stack would have been absolutely no use. It would have been in the way, and eventually sometime it would have collapsed in the near future. Near future being anywhere from 50 to 100 years from now.
Where did all the bricks go?
Right behind us. There's a lot of brick and debris under here, and you can see some of them in in this large pile, and that was supporting much of the rebar and the cement that came out of the base of the stack. Now that debris, if it is clean and much of it has been washed down, if you notice a large section of the brick over here, it's mainly underneath this dirt at the present time. Once it's washed down, it can be used as clean fill once again. And if it's not used as clean fill, it will be again deposited into the landfill that we're going to develop.
Will this be part of the materials used to line that pit of the landfill?
It will be deposited into the landfill. It will not be used as part of the material to line the landfill. We're going to use the fly ash over there.
Oh, from Fly Ash Mountain?
The toe of the mountain. We're not going to take down Fly Ash Mountain. The landfill will be equal to Fly Ash Mountain. I can tell you about that when we get over to that locale.
Oh, goodness. This is huge.
Yep.
How many people have been employed to work on this cleanup effort?
At various times, there's anywhere from 60 to 100. And of course, they're acclimated, as far as the various contractors under the major contractor on site, anywhere from 60 to 100. And of course, as the contracts are completed or those segments of the cleanups are completed, we come down anywhere from 20 to 25. Sometimes we have less than that. During the design stage of the landfill, design stage, we're at 30% level right at the present time. We anticipate 100% of the design of the landfill to be completed in the latter part of this year. Hopefully, the landfill will be started construction in the spring of next year, be completed at that time under state guidelines, and then the landfill, along with our federal guidelines for landfills, and then what they can do is start putting the material in. We can cover up the landfill, and again, hope to be out of here by the latter part of '99 as far as the landfill construction and the removal project is concerned. As far as the remedial process, you still have a lot to do.
How much of the $33 million has been spent so far?
Approximately $5.4 million to $5.6 million of that of the removal money, $33 million, has been spent so far. Remember now, we've got to the remainder of that money has to be used to segregate, pack, and ship off and locate hazardous waste disposal areas in the United States, and that includes an awful lot of contaminated material that they have removed during the removal process, and that's very, very expensive. Additionally, the remaining part of whatever segment of the $33 million is concerned, whatever remaining segment will be used to construct the landfill, put the material in it, and cap off the landfill. So
does it look like you'll have enough to...
Oh, yeah. Right. We're right on schedule from what I understand, speaking with the on-scene coordinator yesterday, that we're right on schedule and project. In fact, a few dollars under. I would like to remind people that Superfund money, the $33 million we're utilizing for Superfund, is from the Superfund Trust Fund. And the Superfund Trust Fund is an assessment against the petrochemical industry. It's not tax money that goes into the general fund from your paycheck or my paycheck or anybody else's paycheck in the United States. This trust fund is about 1/10 of a penny per gallon of plastic, per oil, per gasoline, and that goes into the trust fund. That was authorized under the Superfund program and the Superfund law. However, from what I understand, we stopped collecting that money from the petrochemical industry on December 31st of 1996. And Congress does recognize that money has to be, from what I understand, out of Washington, D.C., is that Congress recognizes they have to reauthorize that particular segment of the trust fund to continue the cleanup of approximately 1,450 sites, Superfund sites in the nation. Right now, we have 450 sites that have been cleaned up completely. Their construction, if they have a water treatment facility, a pump and treat, that facility is considered operational and completely cleaned up. If we have some, that's approximately 450 out of the 1450, we have some 900 sites in the nation that are under construction, and we hope to have by the year 2001 approximately 950 sites completed and under construction, and then we will have some 300 to 400 that are going under some phase of design at the present time. So it's not a process that's going to occur overnight. These buildings weren't built overnight. The contamination didn't occur overnight. And believe it or not, they still say that there's some 2,000 to 3,000 sites in the nation that have not made the Superfund list that still have to be cleaned up.
I heard someone say that this was the second worst EPA site in the world. Is that true?
I would say that as far as the world is concerned, in Eastern Europe, you do have many more sites that they're not even beginning to approach the cleanup levels, or even starting to think about putting a Superfund program in place in Eastern Europe. As far as the second in the United States, this is one of the most complex sites in the United States that we're cleaning up because of the variety of chemicals, the variety of buildings, the variety of things that they did at this particular site, which, by the way, during the war effort, during World War II, we needed this particular facility, and we also needed it, from what I understand, during the development of the Cold War, during the development of rockets during the Cold War, because of the rayon factors and the process that they used for lining of the rocket nozzles. As far as being number 2 in the nation, I'll take your word on that. I haven't seen that. It's just an extremely complex site.
Should people be worried about their health that live near here?
Only if they, and I have to underline the if they come onto the site and they have become, how shall I say it, if they actually play in the dirt, play in the contamination for a number of years. We normally try to assess sites on the risk of health using a barometer, or just an outline of a youngster actually playing in the dirt for 24 hours a day for so many years on a particular site. Naturally, we don't want children, we don't want adults on the site who are not certified as far as safety concerns are concerned and go through what we call a 40-hour OSHA presentation, or 40 hours study of how to take care of contaminated material, get it off your clothing, wear the white Tyvek suits. A lot of people call them moon suits. They're just white suits that keep the chemicals and the contamination off of you. And since there's no construction underway today, that's why you and I are here talking about it, because we don't think anything's going on. As far as actual being worried about anything blowing off-site, when we take things down, we try to put a wall of curtain on it, spray it down, spray asbestos down completely. That's part of the requirements. We do every safety factor plus to make sure that the contaminants do not gravitate into the environment. Now, again, getting back to what caused the showdown or the close down of the site when things were not upgraded on the site and there was no interest in stopping the water violations into the river, then you have a major concern. And you had over 2,000 water violations in the river. That's a concern.
That's when it rains. There is an odor coming still from the site.
You can smell it right here. It's part of the site. The site has always smelled. During when it was, we have been told by the people that worked here, they always had this particular smell with this particular site. And until we have clean dirt, until we take out and treat all the water, including that in the lagoons, and until we address the sewer lines, and until we cover over the site that's contaminated material with clean soil, we believe that the site is going to continue to smell. We don't want. It's nothing that the people haven't been living with. Do they have to worry about it? No, they don't have to worry about this particular smell. It's just one of those odors that you live with during at a particular manufacturing facility, and that's not only here. It's at other manufacturing viable manufacturing facilities throughout the United States. The area we're looking at right now was before the pile of debris was transferred over on top of it, and by the way, you'll notice clean soil underneath that, was known as acid reclaim. And this is where they took all of the acids from the various processes which were draining from it or whatever it might be, and then what they did, they reclaimed those acids to be reused again in the various processes, and you can do that chemically. It was an extremely tenuous, very descriptive type of a reclaimed building. You will see that the interior of the building, even from the picture back in 1989, when the building, when the Avtex facility was shut down, the interior of the building looks like Alien 1, 2, 3, 4, and Resurrection combined. I mean, there is just no way that you would actually send anybody into the building to work. You couldn't even send anybody in to start to reclaim the facility or clean it out. It was just decrepit. It was corroded. If you would step on a huge steel, what looked like a stable steel walkway, it would collapse on you. It was just extremely just non-worker friendly. About the nicest way I can put it.
How were you possibly able to get these down without going inside?
We looked inside, decided that it was not available, not practical to go inside to reclaim this, so we tore it down from the outside with huge reclamation machines, such as huge backhoes, huge cranes, huge ball and cranes. And as the facility came down, then we decontaminated the material as much as possible under high pressure hose. And by the way, we treated that water, kept it, treated that water, and then it was treated again before it went out into treated in the FMC-operated facility, the wastewater treatment plant. Many of the contaminants are still on site to a degree, some of the contaminants from the acid reclaim building, but many of the contaminants were shipped off under the remedial program many years ago.
And the rest of these buildings, after the last building is taken down tomorrow, the rest of these buildings will still be here until some future time. Is that?
Yes, and it's not our responsibility. The only thing that we decided when the report came out about 3 to 4 years ago, when we did an assessment on the various buildings, that we had to address the imminent threat of the buildings that were showing collapse, that were corroded, that were undermined by the various acids. Their floors were cement. You had huge steel beams supporting the roofs and the interior of the buildings, but underneath the cement there were huge caverns which people could actually walk through. Those caverns were developed by the various acids leaking into the base limestone underneath the floor, so you couldn't put people into those particular buildings.
Are those holes still being eaten away?
No, what occurred, since this is the churn and mix number 2 building, is coming one of the last ones to come down, because we are also assessing one more building on the site under this removal program. And what occurred there is we took the floor out. As you can see in some areas, some of the cement and the rebar, took the floor out, put clean soil in the large area which we were discussing just a few moments ago, in fronting churn and mix number 2. Those were some of the buildings that had the caverns underneath. Those caverns have now been filled in by clean soil.
So it should be stopped. The process is stopped now.
Yeah, it was stopped a long time ago, but the buildings were just not available to be used, nor could we send our people in safely to reclaim the building or get the transfer lines out or material, whatever it might be. And the reason for that is you're not going to stand very close to a huge beam holding up a 2-story building, which is inside the property lines. We have air monitoring stations which are constantly being monitored, and they're read 6 to 8 times a day by our technical assistance team members, and it shows that if any contamination, as we're working on site, if any contamination gets off site. So far we haven't had any move off site, any contamination move off site. What occurs if fine particles from, say, a demolition area would start to move off site, you shut down that demolition area and assess what has gone wrong. So that's basically the bottom line, that we can monitor, make sure that all of our air monitoring and the community surrounding the area is completely safe. We have had several times hits, what we call hits, 1 or 2 parts per billion, 1 or 2 parts per billion. We'll shut the operation down and then assess, okay, where's that wind drift coming from? We believe in those particular instances, and we can identify the various contaminants, they're either coming from diesel trucks moving by or maybe off-site from a different location, because the wind drift will be from a different location, from off-site. So several of those particular hits have been outside the area or from diesel trucks inside the area, and that in effect is what is occurring here. We post those results for the public at our gate in the evening hours, anytime around 5 to 6 o'clock in the evening, and they can come